Hi, I'm Ikea, and for today's video I want to ramble on for a little bit on our new season, Year 5, Season 2, Puppeteers, as we're going after the recruiter and rescuing our few remaining allies that were captured by Black Tusk during the raid on the White House. Although, of course, I'm mostly going to be discussing some of the numbers and the gear and what will find use for me personally, and we'll go into the build collection as that is more my forte than lore. And especially, we're going to be discussing on the front end of this video for quite a little bit, the little monster that I'm holding in my hands there, the Oreo, the Ouroboros, as well, it received some changes going from PTS to live. We're going to go over some of the numbers. We're going to compare it to a bunch of things. We're also going to see how fast it stacks, for instance, as well. And we'll discuss all of those things. And then afterwards, we'll go into what will become changes to the build collection, as that's what I'm going to couch this video as what will and won't find use for me personally. Because, yeah, for instance, the gear set will find the slot for me. The brand set, I really haven't found a use for. One of the names will go into Hunter's Fury for me, but we'll discuss all of those things as we go over them. As we'll go after the numbers of the Oreo, we'll go a little bit into each of those parts. As yeah, so let's jump on over into some of the numbers of the Oreo. And to discuss the numbers, first I'm going to show the build that will mainly be used for the calculations sheets in a second. And that is what was last season's model, basically, with the Elmo, but then with the chest swap from Cheska to Grupo, because we, of course, have a little bit more crit chance available from the Ouroboros. So we're going from the 20 available from the Elmo with its mod. We're going to 21 plus 10 from a mod. So we're getting 31 crit chance, meaning that we can put away our Cheska. Everything else will be rolled to crit damage, all the mods crit damage, Coyote and Grupo. We'll be discussing a chest version as well, and what will happen there is that a striker chest will come in and a Grupo piece will replace one of the minor slot, in my case the holster. And we'll discuss some other ones as well, and we'll briefly jump to and fro when needed. If we jump over to the spreadsheet that I've prepared for today, this will of course be linked down below and will be available for viewing, as it is a shared file on a Google Doc. It is set up as these are with, there is a video available nowadays that you can watch if you're interested in how these exactly work, but to briefly explain them, we have multi-calculators here that are meant to compare builds together, which in an easy way with their burst and sustained DPSs. Input happens down here, output happens up here, and we'll use it to compare burst and sustained DPS numbers. We're starting out here with the numbers at the top of this with the Elmo strikers, last season's model basically at this point, with Obliterate. We're going in with two numbers here, as stated as well there, DTH and DTA, because of course ARs do come with DTH 21%. That increases their damage to DTH quite strong. Of course, 21% is a big bonus. In the numbers for the Ouroboros, we don't need to do that because it doesn't have DTA or DTH, except for one setup we'll discuss in a little bit. And we'll, yeah, just because of that, we kind of have to compare both of the numbers of the Oreo versus the Elmo. Because, yeah, with the Elmo having DTH active, it is doing decent numbers. But the Oreo is quite strongly destroying it. Now, of course, the Oreo comes with its own weaknesses. Range is an issue. Ammo consumption is an issue. But when you have numbers this big, when you have basically 45% extra damage over the DTH value. So as a reminder, this again is just against DTA and DTH, because we can see that when we go to DTA with the Obli, with the Elmo, it is dropping quite severely. It is losing its edge by a lot, and we're basically doing against armor, especially with this Oreo with the Coyote set to 15 to 25, which is what this first one is. The second one that we have here is with the Coyote set to 0 to 15. It is almost double the number, especially against DTA. It is pretty severe increase. Now, of course, yeah, that comes at a cost. Range is an issue. It has a 15-meter optimal range. It has, of course, an ammo consumption that is unmatched by anything else. But that doesn't really matter when you need the DPS. And we're finding that already with Incursion. If you're going in with teams that already have the Oreo, it is pretty easy. If you're going in with teams that don't have any Oreos yet, it is a little bit more of a challenge. And that's kind of the issue. This is destroying build diversity in the weapon slot. We already had strikers kind of destroying build diversity in the gear slots because it is so strong that we don't really think about any of the other red sets. Negotiator still kind of competes, but Umbra, well, now Tip of the Spear, even Hunter's Fury has kind of gone to pasture, even though you would think that an SMG on the SMG set would be stronger than on the striker set. Of course, that is not the case. Because, yeah, this is quite the big increase. We can then discuss here that, the first Oreo number is indeed the Coyote set to 15 to 25. And then with the second, we are keeping it at that 53 crit chance, which that build has, without any crit chance rolls. Because, of course, the Oreo is kind of a shorter range weapon, so you would try to keep more the short range buff up. But I would still suggest, because what you could do, of course, is flip one crit chance or one crit damage to a crit chance with a mod, for instance, gaining you a 59 crit chance here, dropping a little bit of crit damage, having a much better ratio. You will actually beat the other number above it here. But here, of course, we're leaving a little bit of a hole because there will be multiple Coyotes in most teams. And we are not too far behind. Now, of course, it is like 3%-ish there in difference, but that is not that big of a difference. I would personally set my Oreo up as 53, and then in this case, 178 pre-Coyote, and then hope for some mid-range buffs along the way from myself or others, and then if I get the close-range buff on top of it, it is quite strong. One other thing we could, of course, do is, as I have it here with a Sokolov piece, if we set it in its optimal setup, and this is more for like if you're running it solo, if you go Grupo Sokolov versus Grupo Coyote, the Grupo Sokolov actually loses out both at 0 to 15 and 15 to 25. So for solo play, this is completely a non-starter. For group play, of course, what you can do is, in the same way that, for instance, we would have a Cheska chest on Elmos, and then if there were many Coyotes already, we would take a Grupo mask for ourselves instead of the Coyote mask, and enjoy the buff of others, and on top of that, have another 15 crit damage from a brand bonus. Because, yeah, if there are too many Coyotes, it can sometimes be, worthwhile to swap it out. And in the case for the strikers with Oreo, I would definitely recommend, a Sokolov piece as the fill-in piece. So I will be carrying from now on a Sokolov piece, a mask piece, and if there are too many Coyotes already, then I will swap from Coyote over to Sokolov and get an extra 10 damage, weapon damage from the brand bonus, and of course then hope that my allies keep enough Coyote buffs up. Let's move on to this piece. So here we'll be discussing how to set up especially a chest striker, so going with the chest of striker. Again, of course, we're going with Grupo first, but there's, of course, another option we could have here, and that is contractors. And that is what those numbers are comparing. So we're going to go with a Grupo, in this case, a holster. But then instead of that, what would happen if we had a striker's holster and a contractor's instead? What we see in the numbers, which is this last set, and they are comparing to each other down here, so the separate comparison here. The first one is the Oreo with the striker's chest with the Grupo holster. That is as our baseline. We can see that actually when we go into our DTA number, so for the first one, we have the DTA number. For the second one, we have it without DTA because, of course, DTA is only active on armor, so we have to calculate it out twice. Even on the DTA number, it is actually losing out on, specifically here as we're comparing everything on body shots. And yeah, this means that I personally will prefer having, if I'm going with a chest striker, because there are often times where it's worthwhile going for that extra damage. As we can see, it is versus this 15.3 million of the normal variant or with the obliterate variant, we can see that we're going up to 18.3 million burst DPS with the chest, of course, at full. We have to stack it up to 200 now instead of 100, and that comes in general play. It's kind of hard, and actually with the Oreo, it's extra hard as it is so strong that it kills faster than anything else, meaning that it's actually quite hard to stack it to 200. But for instance, within the incursion, within the raid, especially within the incursion, for instance, you can actually stack on the boss, for instance, the fire boss, right? Before he actually loses immunity, you can actually stack up on him. So you can kind of shoot him before and stack up on him to 200 stacks and then have that ready to deal with the ads and with the boss itself. So there are moments where you can do kind of that stuff. And of course, for instance, Razorbacks famously where you just shoot Razorback that is just sitting there and you can just stack up to 200 quite easily. So there are moments where this is a valid choice. But then, yeah, the contractors version to me isn't really. I would much rather go with the Grupo. And the downside especially is that to go with the contractors, we are actually somewhat crit starved still. We would need to flip one crit damage at one place to crit chance to make up for the lost crit chance. Because otherwise as well, if we go actually with a lower number, we're definitely losing out. So we have to flip a crit chance. And whenever you have to do that for contractors or for foxes, really, you kind of lose out. Whenever a set is, because yeah, we are still crit starved. A Cheska doesn't really solve it because at that point as well, you're getting a little bit of a better number out of it. But of course, that would come in the place of the Coyote. And the Coyote here, of course, because if you're going Cheska contractors or Cheska Grupo at that point, but then you would have to be expecting the Coyote buff from others. One thing I do want to make a note of is because, of course, Headshot is additive in its pool to our crit damage. If we are going for mostly headshots, as I have it here, and of course adding it as well to this one, as I'm fumbling with my there, we can see that actually when we are going well for headshots, the contractors does pull ahead by close to 2%, which is a noticeable difference. But of course, this is on headshots only. And then, yeah, that makes it, to me, I will personally, if I'm going Chest Striker, go with Grupo. It seems a lot more consistent and more easy to use. But yeah, there are sometimes ways to like justify this. Either way, it is they are pretty close to each other. So yeah, if we take away that again, we're at 99.78 there. So if you're mostly shooting armor, you'll be decently well. If you're getting some headshots in extra as well, you'll match up kind of with Grupo. So it is not a per se, it is a choice to be made. So yeah, let's move on to actually grading, and we'll discuss grading once again. As here I've prepared the Oreo, and we're going from grade 0 to grade 24 with it, as of course grade 24 is now available. And kind of what the increase is, which you don't really even need a complete burst calculation for. You can quite easily just compare the weapon damage because you're getting an increased multiplier here. And that will be consistent through all of these numbers, as it is a percentage increase basically, so it's increasing the absolute value by a percentage. But just to show it a little bit, because I find it interesting, and hopefully others do as well. As yeah, we're going from grading 0 to grading 10. We are gaining 4.35%, because yeah, on a build that has 130 weapon damage, that is the increase. Going from 0 to 20, we're getting 8.7%, which is a common known number for not having a specific weapon damage brands bonus, and then grading to 20. Now, of course, we have grade 24 available to us, and yeah, that gains us a little under 2%. Going from 0 to 20, of course, cost 55. Going from 20 to 24 costs 80 exotic components. To me, this grade 24 is not worth it really ever. Although, of course, I say that and I grade my favorite FAMASs on my accounts to 24 because I enjoyed them so much. It is a stupid thing to do, except if you're using a weapon really a lot. It is an increase. We're reaching the point now with grade 24 where it is getting a noticeable increase going from 20 to 24, because each step, each gradation from going from grade 20 to 21 is 20 exotic components, 21 to 22 is 20. So once you hit 20, it becomes exorbitant prices, as they're just basically, we go from nickel and diming to just throwing bricks of cash. And yeah, but of course, if you're using a weapon a lot, the Oreo, if it stays in its current form, might be a weapon that I also take to grade 24, as it will likely find a lot of use for me. Then what we didn't actually compare is, while we did compare the chest striker kind of within itself with Grupo and the contractors, we didn't actually compare it to an obliterate variant. As here we actually, as I mislabeled this here, and I'm gonna take that out. As this newer one down here is actually the chest striker with the Oreo graded to 24, and we can kind of compare the two grade 24 numbers together, and that I've done that here. We're going from having the chest, which is a common value for it, is that we're gaining 20% damage output. So going from obliterate with obliterate at full and 100% or 100 stacks on striker, going to the chest version and getting not having obliterate anymore, but having the chest available to you, you're doing 20% more damage at 200 stacks. But of course, this one has to stack to 100 and then just stack obliterate. This one has to stack to 200. They play quite differently, but yeah, at points it is quite valuable to go for this chest variant and get a ton more damage out whenever it is viable. Because yeah, we're going basically from 16.9 million DPS, let's say 17-ish million to 20 million. We are gaining quite a lot, and especially 20 million is numbers I personally didn't think we would ever reach with the burst DPSs, as we'll discuss in a little bit with a focus FAMAS as well. But first, let's compare it to a common thing that people compare it to, which is the vectors, which it, of course, kind of is. Let's discuss the older sibling of the Oreo, which is kind of in the Vector 45s. In this case, the Dark Winter, as it has come a lot in conversation that people feel that the Dark Winter already did these kind of damages or something. Knowing anything about DPS would make you squint your eyes at that quite heavily. To show it here as well, if I go in here and turn on base damages for these weapons, this white damage that it shows is the base damage. As we're here, the total damage is different between the two, as I don't have a graded 20 Dark Winter, and I at this point also don't have a ungraded Ouroboros, as I only have one currently. So we can't, the total damages would be the same on them if they were graded the same. And we can also see that in their base damage, which is this white number, it is 40.4k. And also on the Oreo, it is 40.4k. Now, of course, this is truncated, but we can especially back calculate this as well to back to its base number as well. And we know for a fact that these two share a base number, damage number of 40k 430. And yeah, so they share a base damage. And the RPM of the Dark Winter on Striker, on Obliterate Striker, we've gone back to an Obliterate Striker as well for these calculations in a second. The RPM is 1380 for the Dark Winter. It is 1688 for the Ouroboros. So 308 RPM more in absolute values. Anybody that knows anything about DPS knows that, yeah, these two will not compare favorably for the Dark Winter in this case. Let's move on to this calculation sheet where I've prepared, the Oreo as it is on the Obliterate Striker there, at full stacks, of course, and versus a Vector 45. First off, without a talent active. This is as well with the Coyote at 15 to 25. So they're set up kind of in the same way to be using the Coyote at 14 to 25 on that build. We'll discuss the second set in a second, because we'll change, of course, one thing that Winter can do to gain a little bit of an advantage. Here we can see that, yeah, on the Oreo, of course, we just have this as the numbers at the top, which the rest, these other two are comparing to. We're going to go into the Vector without a talent active, we can see that, yeah, it is 20% behind. It is a little bit less than 20%, 19 point or 18.25%. But yeah, it is far behind. Now, of course, if killer is active, although of course killer is conditional, you need to make a crit kill, so it won't be active on the first kill. But let's say killer is active all of the time, right? Like it's always active. A bug happens, killer is always active. Still, at that point, the vector is behind by quite a lot, more than 7%. That is a huge number. That is quite the big number. And of course, on sustain, it even stays more behind because the Ouroboros has 50 round mag, the vector has a 45 round mag, the Ouroboros also has a mod for reload speed. The Dark Winter won't have that. So yeah, on burst especially, is even still stays behind. Now, what the Dark Winter can do is especially to catch up a little bit, because the Ouroboros, of course, 10 crit chance and 10 crit damage on its mods. The Dark Winter could go 15 crit chance, which is a much better setup for it. And especially if we then compare it as well with it being the short range buff of Coyote, because that's likely more going to be active for these weapons, as we'll try to push in and be very close range. At that point, it is closer, but it is still behind. And by quite a lot. And even on this number where killer is always active. So keep in mind, this 94.89% is if killer was always active. This is not what is something that is going to happen. But in hypotheticals, if it was, then yeah, we are still more than 5% behind. And of course, you can't do this, for instance, against raid bosses. If you're fighting right, you might trigger it for a second on one of the ads, but you won't have it active for long enough to deal the continuous damage that it would need. Next up, we're going to compare it. This is, again, comparing then to the number at the top. That's why it's the same level of gray. A focus, FAMAS. So we're going with a pristine edge. We're swapping the scope to the 8x scope. On the FAMAS, we are setting it up to be the crit chance and crit damages in the way that that build would prefer, with having the Coyote at 15 to 25. At full focus, the FAMAS is still behind. And this is kind of, yeah, what my issue is with the Oreo. Now, of course, this plays differently. This has more range. You can hide behind far cover. You can shield peek with this. But you could also just go in and kill them. And with a lot of content, you can just go in and kill them. Even with Legendary, if you're playing with a Foam Eclipse, you can push in and kill them quicker with this. And because you can kill quicker, whenever you have more DPS, you can use that to your advantage, kill quicker, and be more confident that when you push in, you can kill whatever's in front of you. Once you kind of get that confidence with this build, it becomes very clear how much more damage it is. Because you'll push in, and instead of waiting more behind and trying to kill something from afar because you needed to do that in the past, like the elite mini tanks in DUA's first outside room, instead of that, you just push into them with 2 players being Ouroboroses, and you just burn them down in seconds because you have so much more DPS. Also, of course, this needs to kind of stack up to it with focus, especially. You might lose focus more often. This, of course, is also stacking a little bit faster because of the RPM increase, because yeah, the RPM is even over a FAMAS, of course, quite the increase. And yeah, it becomes really clear once you start playing around with this, how much of an increase in damage it is. And it very much changes the rhythm of the game because of that. Let's move on to one final part, which has come up a little bit, which is the stacking of the Ouroboros on Striker. Let's discuss one final thing that has come up recently, because the Ouroboros' RPM is, of course, quite good. People have been discussing, is it better to use an ACS to stack, or is it better to use the Ouroboros to stack? In my experience, stacking with the ACS is still the way to go. We'll go into some of the numbers in a second, but first, before we go into that, of course, I want to discuss that, yeah, the ACSs have a few ways of setting them up. So, for instance, here, I'm using a rock and roll. This is my preferred thing, especially for stacking to 200, so especially if it's a chest striker. Going a normal ACS, you, of course, can have a talent instead of extra max size, because especially if you're stacking to 100, this extra max size really doesn't come into play. You're much better off with any of the talents really here. But I also wanted to discuss quite briefly another one, which is that where the normal ACSs, for instance, this rock and roll only has optics and an underbarrel as its mod slots. The lefty actually is an oddity, as when it came in, of course, it was with the model of a 612. They altered it to be an AC. Well, they meant it always to be an ACS. They altered it to match that, what they meant. But then also it didn't still fire automatically. They fixed that a patch later. So yeah, it is kind of a Frankenstein. And due to it being a little bit of a Frankenstein, it not only has an optics rail and then also an underbarrel, it also has a magazine slot. And in its magazine slot, you can also put a rate of fire mod. This is a little bit of an oddity, and but of course we can gain 15 RPM with it, which is a tiny amount, because that is the amount that the mod adds in over a normal ACS, which has 345 on strikers, as we have it here. And yeah, we'll discuss all of those numbers as we'll jump into here, as I've prepared here, stacking on strikers, and we're going with the Oreo. We're going with an ACS, so this whole area is for the Oreo, this area is for the ACS, just a normal ACS. This, of course, could have a damage talent, which will benefit it. Then we have the Rock and Roll, which, of course, has a fixed talent for extra mag size, which will benefit it, especially when going to 200. And on the right here, although it's a little bit cut off on the last part of it there, but is a lefty with its RPM, which is a little bit higher than the rest. If you go over to the Oreo, we have the RPM. We're calculating it down to an RPS, which is a much more digestible number. In the case of the Oreo, it is 28.133 repeating, although this is, of course, on Striker, to be clear, because we'll be discussing all of the numbers on Striker, because that's where you'll be stacking on. Heartbreaker, of course, also exists, but you wouldn't use the Ouroboros there, because you would much more prefer something that uses the weapon damage, the AR or LMG talent that it has, brand bonus or gear set bonus. And we're taking that RPS and its mag size, as we have it here, or actually the stacks per mag that it has here. We're taking a firing time out of that by taking the RPS and then dividing the mag size by the RPS, getting a firing time out of it. Here we have the stacks per mag, so how much of a potential per mag does it have? And then we'll discuss in a second how much time it will take to get to 100 stacks and 200 stacks. With the ACSs, we're of course doing the same. We're going down into its RPS, but then of course the trait of the shotguns is that for Heartbreaker and for Strikers, it will stack per pellet, meaning that its RPS is getting multiplied by 8. All of the shotguns have 8 pellets when they fire, meaning that we have a potential of 46 pellets available, meaning that the stacks or per second, so this is 46 pellets per second available to it. We're also deriving a firing time from this RPS, and we're also calculating out that 20 times 8 is the shots, and then times the pellets, means that it has a potential of doing 160 striker stacks. That, of course, is less than the 200, but is more than enough for the 100. And of course, this is also a little bit theoretical, because the Ouroboros more likely will be able to reach out a little bit more into the mid-range and still be a lot more on target, where even the ACSs, even on short range, well, sometimes one of the pellets will go past the body and you'll only hit 7, even if you're point-blank range. So yeah, we are discussing theoreticals, but yeah, this is just to not add in any personal biases and such. We can derive from this conclusion, I feel. If you move on to the Rock and Roll, it of course has the same amounts on most of the things, except that it has a bigger mag, meaning that it has a longer firing time, and it also has then more stacks per mag, because of course it has 30 rounds instead of 20. That is the Rock and Roll's kind of strength. It only comes into play really with stacking to 200. Then we have the Lefty, which has a little bit better RPS, going from 5.75 to 6, meaning that its firing time is actually shorter, of course, because it is firing those 20 rounds that it has faster. It has the same 160 potential. If we go to the 100 stacks, and keep in mind that here I'm not accounting for decay. because I want to avoid that, because it is especially with the with the multiple decays per at what stack you are with Striker, it is quite a complicated calculation. While I'm confident I could put one together, it would also suck, and I want to get this video out. So we might revisit that in a full way. But from this, we can derive somewhat of a conclusion. So to see it in that way, this is us getting 100 stacks. How much time would it take us to get 100 stacks without actually counting out the decay? Because decay would happen here, and we would have to account for that to actually hit 100 stacks. For the Ouroboros, it will basically have to fire an entire mag, reload once, fire an entire mag, meaning that is a 4.9 seconds for it to get 100 stacks worth for Striker. The ACSs are still the king of stacking, doing it in especially just even the normal ACS at 100 stacks in 2.17 seconds, so 2.2 seconds, less than half of the Ouroboros, mostly because, of course, it doesn't need to reload, and it's doing more pellets per second over the rounds. Now, you could, of course, argue a little bit that you might miss a little bit more with the ACS and stuff, but to me, it will not miss that much that this number will be exceeded by the Ouroboros. Now, of course, you also have swap. You need to swap from weapon to stack with the ACS first and then go to the Ouroboros. So there is that. And as well, Obliterate does not stack with the ACSs in the same way that Striker does. So this is more of a thing as well that will benefit just Strikers to be more on the ACS, because here as well with the Ouroboros, you're also stacking up Obliterate. I'm not accounting for that here. It's a little bit, yeah, we could go deeper into that, but because we will revisit the Ouroboros, especially because I also want to kind of go into some other variants that we could run it on. But here, just as an all-round number, we can kind of say that, especially on 100 stacks, it is likely better to go with the ACS. And yeah, the rock and roll, of course, has no benefits really on 100 stacks, because yeah, the potential here was already here to get to 100 stacks. The rock and roll doesn't really add anything to that. The lefty, of course, stacks a tiny amount faster. It is a tiny amount. Are we min-maxing? Is it worth it? A perfect sledgehammer isn't a bad bonus or talent as well, so we can make use of that maybe from time to time, and maybe make this worthwhile. Once we go to 200 stacks, here I feel it is I'm much more confident in saying that, yeah, the ACSs will very easily win out, even if you're leaving out, because here also we're leaving out Obliterate, so that is no longer a factor. And then, yeah, the Ouroboros will take 11 seconds to stack to 200 to full. The ACSs will need one reload. The normal ACSs will need one reload, meaning they take it 6.14 seconds here. Here is where the rock and roll kind of comes into its own with 4.34 seconds, meaning that, yeah, it does cut down quite a bit there on the stacking time. And this is kind of what I use rock and rolls for, to stack to 200. The lefty, of course, does it a little bit faster than the normal ACS, but of course comes at a cost of a talent that you could be doing something with. Or, you know, Sledgehammer isn't bad still, but of course, yeah, we could have Pummel or something there. And yeah, this very much, at this point, especially at 200 stacks, I feel this is worthwhile to swap to a rock and roll, stack to 200, or even to ACS, stack to 200, and then swap back. Because, yeah, even if you try to account for swap speed and such, it will win out. It will definitely win out. Because, yeah, the Ouroboros is a fast weapon. The ACSs, though, are still the king of stacking. Let's move on to some of the other things that have been added in this update, as we'll go into the other exotic weapon and some of the gear sets and such, and we'll discuss some of the ways that they will find their way into the build collection. And to discuss all of the other overshadowed pieces, as we went quite in depth there, of course, into the Oreo. There are, of course, another weapon added, the Iron Lung. It is... depending on how you feel about them, it is, to me, a little bit on par with, a little bit like the Pestilence and the Blue Screen. That may either sound like faint praise or hellish damnation, depending on how much you enjoy those weapons. To me, it's very much will find a place in the build collection. It will be put into this ongoing directive build where I feel it does work decently well. It does scale off of the status effect. You could go with a status effect version as well with ongoing directive. This, I feel, is the one weapon that kind of makes that somewhat viable. Although what it does have is a decent enough base weapon damage over the MG5, which is kind of its high-end counterpart, where they share an RPM, but its base damage is much higher. It comes with 2 crit damage mods, meaning that for the third attribute, I very much would recommend crit chance, because you kind of need it in any build anyway that this would go into. You would need this crit chance a little bit, and LMGs, of course, provide you the ability to have crit chance and damage targets out of cover together, because the secondary attribute, is already detox. And this will be the place where this Iron Lung will live for me. I've been using it a little bit. It is a decent enough starting weapon for getting the chain going, if you want to do it without like keeping your skills there. It is not bad of a damage dealer. It will kind of compare unfavorably, especially with other LMGs, mostly because it has a very small magazine size with 85, 50 base with a 35 mod that it has. And especially on LMGs, you have this hellishly long reload. You can kind of negate it with Ninja Bike, but honestly, I feel having played around with that Ninja Bike knee pads, that's not worth it, because yeah, when you're cover to covering or vaulting over something, you're kind of thinking that like it is still a time loss to reload it, especially for this 85 mag. I have been using it at times just to get something on fire when it kind of could be useful for the ongoing directive build, especially for instance if I run into a named. But of course, a sadist weapon would basically do on par damage with this, because it is that talent is so strong, especially for this build. But of course, you could have a shotgun. You could have a Scorpio here and just shotgun them and disorient them with that. So yeah, it is a bit of a. It doesn't have a pure purpose to me. It will find a place here on ongoing directive, but I won't be using it much, I feel. And yeah, to move to the last exotic piece that they added, the collector. As you may notice, we are not in a build. We are not in a... I haven't put this into somewhere. We are actually in my stash, and that will likely be where it will live. It will find some use for me. There are always challenges, of course, to get grenade kills. I quite often would use an perfect Mad Bomber. I might actually still have it. I usually just recalibrate whatever build I'm on to have a Mad Bomber on it. Although, of course, we also have the new named chest that will kind of do the same thing, which also will not really find use for me. I'll be using this chest for that purpose, not saving a perfect Mad Bomber chest. This one works decently well for it. Its radius and damage is kind of cool. It's kind of sometimes funny to just get a really large grenade radius for a flame grenade and maybe pair it with sledgehammer and stuff. But it just ends up being too much of a loss. You're giving up a brand bonus. You're giving up a damage talent. This was never going to find real use. But yeah, I will use it on challenges like that, and might also even find some use for people, well, when they're doing field recon or something, when they need to get those grenade kills. I mean, this isn't the worst thing. One thing to keep in mind, as I feel a lot of people stumble over this, they think that you will get a fresh grenade every 30 seconds. You need to get below 2 grenades, because this is up to 2 grenades. The wording is a little bit weird, but yeah, whenever you're below 2 grenades, it will give you a grenade every 30 seconds. So it is kind of handy for those challenges, because yeah, you'll use up your grenades. You'll always have basically 2 at the ready, as it'll refill it back up as you're running from activity to activity to just, get these grenade kills. But yeah, it is one of those weird pieces. Someone may find a use for it here and there, but I don't think it will really feature for many people. Let's briefly discuss the names. I'm mostly going to discuss one, because firstly, the new chest, will not find any use for me with Perfect Mad Bomber. I will use the other chest for when I need to do Mad Bomber-like activities. It might find some use for some people in some ways. You could maybe make a really huge flashbang with it. That might be useful in some ways. But yeah, I don't think it will find active use because, yeah, it is giving up a chest talent. That is always the issue with those kind of things. Moving on to then the two named weapons with Stabilize, they will likely not also find some use because the G36 isn't great, the Tommy gun also isn't great. But the talent kind of might, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. But the one named that will find some use for me is, especially in, I think, in Hunter's Fury, I would be okay swapping, especially now as Vigilance is currently, they altered it. It is on a treadle board as a bug, so they likely will alter it back. Vigilance is breaking whenever you get hit on your shield. Now, for me, with Hunter's Fury, a build that is still popular and I quite often will grab, especially, for instance, for solo play, I would quite often run Memento or a Vigilance backpack. There's a third option now, I feel, in this backbone, because this backbone, while normal unstoppable force on just a Sokolov backpack, really wasn't the greatest, especially with if you aren't going all full blue cores, as you shouldn't. I usually go around 2 blue cores. For instance, with this, I would actually drop a blue core on one of the gear pieces and flip this to red if I was going to use this, because of course, if it comes with a blue core, so yeah, if you want the full red one, you kind of need a unicorn, although they are dropping at the rates, all of the names of this season are dropping at the increased rates that they have done for the other seasons as well, with like in Electric or in Habsburg, they are dropping quite a lot. So it is farmable to get a crit chance, crit damage one, which you can reroll to a red. But of course, as well, with the builds that it likely will go into, like Hunter's Fury, you can usually, I for instance, always have 2 blues. I'll just flip one of these to be a blue, red core, and then take the blue here to have 2 blues still. The talent-wise, it does work decently well, especially solo. Although, especially solo as well, again, would you take this over a Memento? A Memento can be really good. This has a lot higher damage potential. The Memento has a much better survivability potential. Because as well, you can kind of flip these 2 blue cores to be red and then still have 2 cores on the shield, which is kind of what I'm using it for, to have 2 blue cores or 2 cores on the shield just to have a stronger shield. I don't think it will really change anything. To me, it is an option. It is a viable and actually effective option for this slot. You are, of course, giving up the brand bonus for it. This plus 20 explosive resistance in play, I found, really doesn't mean anything. Like, this isn't worth anything. But you still have it. You still have it on top. And this kind of course, matches up quite... it has a tiny amount higher damage potential than, for instance, the Sokolov Vigilance backpack that this build usually carries. This one. Because, yeah, instead of... how you can see it is that at full stacks, although of course this is at full stacks, where Vigilance is active from the first shot, you need to get 5 kills with that thing before it is active up to there. But then of course, Vigilance sometimes falls away, and especially in Hunter's Fury, you usually push in pretty deep. You might get shot from the sides, lose Vigilance. So it kind of is also dependent on playstyle, so it is kind of hard to make a blanket statement. But I think, yeah, this backbone is a viable thing to use. Some people have also talked about it, maybe using it in Regulus builds and such. I personally wouldn't. Especially on those kind of builds, on, for instance, as well, determined builds, you really want that damage on the first shot. This will, of course, not have any damage on the first shot. You need to get 5 kills to get the full out of it. You would need to get 4 kills to kind of match up with Vigilance. And yeah, while it gives you a higher high end, we usually don't need that. We usually prefer more to have Vigilance here, to have that first shot go out with an extra bonus just so you can definitely kill a purple, which is usually the point where you kind of need Vigilance for, is on most, for instance, hotshot build as well, having Vigilance on a backpack means that you can also start a chain on one-shotting, headshotting most of the purples that exist. So yeah, this is a maybe. It will maybe show up on one of my Hunter's Furies, but likely as well, maybe not, especially if they fix Vigilance back up. And to move on to the gear set, as we'll not be discussing the brand set, as honestly, it will not find any use for me outside of that one name that we discussed a second ago. Here, the Ortiz Exuro set, which is for the incinerator turret and will turn it into its prototype version. The Ortiz incinerator turret prototype is a decent set. It does not compare favorably to Eclipse, especially, of course, for instance, for myself. I'm very, I would venture to say I'm pretty competent with Eclipse. I kind of know my routes, especially through missions and such. Especially because of that, I do not have, of course, the same hours of experience on this build. But what I can say already from having played it quite a bit in this last week, it is a viable set. To me, it is kind of on par with Hardwired, and having a Seeker spam build in Hardwired, it's kind of, well, not comparable in damage or such to those things. It is a comparable playstyle. It is just a variant to sometimes pull out. I think over time, some people may find some places where this thing will be more effective than maybe Eclipse just for its CCing potential, because it does have a decent enough CCing potential, especially if there's like one door where enemies spawn from. And that does sometimes happen. For instance, if we think back to Anderson Farm even, or maybe Floor 10 farming, this might have found some use back then. And maybe it will find some use in the future as well. But for general play, I am quite married to Eclipse, and but I will have this build. I will put it in a slot. There's a slot prepared for it, 4.04. It will go into there. It will be saved like this, although with a sacrifice chest instead of this golden chest, just because I have one and I want to use it as a status effect skill haste one. And of course, it will be saved with 5 pieces, because when you like a set, you can put 25% more of that set in your set, and then you have and then your set. No, of course, it will be saved like this, mostly because I like several variants to run with this. Just to show them very briefly, I very much enjoy the Vial version, which is the obvious version, as actually the layout wise, this is my Eclipse, glass Eclipse. I'm just overlaying 4 pieces of Exuro basically over it, and that is the setup that this version is. The Val adds in a little bit of damage. It's scaling off of the status anyway. It's getting a little bit more damage out of it that way, and will help kill reds and such more consistently. The other version that I've quite enjoyed, if we put back the mask, is with a BTSU. And that's also kind of what the 2 skills that I'm going with here are set up for, with the Hive and then the turret. This way I can kind of piggyback them, and I can toss the Hive, opening up an area a little bit so I can push in, tossing in then the turret, and then piggyback the Hive. Like, you can kind of piggyback him like that, and it kind of works well. And especially with the BTSU, of course, we're getting a ton of haste for the Hive. As for instance, here I have the range haste turned off. We're still at 1.5 seconds. The turret, of course, is like 38 seconds, but you can kind of then use the supercharge, for instance, as well, of course, because it resets the other skill whenever you supercharge. So whenever like this runs out, I can supercharge if it's available with the Hive, getting the turret back, negating its cooldown a little bit. And I found this works quite well, especially in groups, of course, because you're also supercharging your allies, you're giving them their Hives back, their skills become super powerful for a few seconds. And this kind of like the hardwired build that I quite enjoy and have made a showcase on, this kind of works the same way. One other variant that I've messed about with, but I'm not convinced by it yet, but I will mess about with it a little bit more, is to put in the Acosta, because of course with the Acosta you can overcharge with tossing a grenade. And overcharging, especially, yeah, the turret is very nice. And then usually in this variant, I do not pair it with a Hive, because especially the Hive actually scales mostly off of skill damage. This build is very much set up for status effect. And then sometimes I usually put foam here or other items that may keep enemies inside of this fire. And I think it is a decent enough set. It has some potential. The turret especially does not do enough damage, especially to compete favorably with Eclipse. I would say that this might need a little bit more oomph. Maybe if this instead as well with the gear set maybe went, well, maybe if the base of this thing went up, or maybe if the bonus went up a little bit, might be a decent damage increase, because especially as well, the skill damage, the initial hit, the actual skill damage hits that it does are pretty weak. I feel maybe if this also had, let's say, 40 skill damage, that would really help this build, and of course make as well things like the hive, a turret along, or a drone alongside this turret viable. And what we've also as well discussed, as I'll briefly discuss here as well, because I made a Reddit post about it, we have this weapon damage on the backpack talent, this plus 25 weapon damage. This turns out to be not weapon damage, this turns out to be an amp, a separate multiplier. It is a separate multiplier towards weapons and towards ballistic skills. Now, of course, it is already using the turret as the flame turret. But yeah, we can put a striker drone next to it, which will benefit from this plus 25 from the backpack talent. But actually, with this extra amp, which it is, I've been finding it quite useful together with the capacitor, because yeah, it buffs up the capacitor to beyond what it quite easily can do. But of course, on Eclipse, you would have as well 30% with the capacitor as well to status affected enemy. So it's keeping it kind of on par with that, 5% less basically. So yeah, it is quite decent to use a capacitor with this build. But again, I feel maybe it could use a little bit more skill damage just to put another skill alongside of it. Because yeah, especially a lot of the status effect skills aren't quite useful when you already have this turret. So yeah, it is a little bit of a hit and miss, and its damage would preferably be a little bit higher. Let's move on to just one last thing, which is the talents, and then we'll round this off. And one last thing I want to discuss here is that we've of course gotten a new talent to the talent pool of Stabilize. It is available for ARs, LMGs, and SMGs. It comes on the Perfect on this military G36 variant, the Born Great, with Perfect Stabilize, and then there's also an SMG Grown Great, which is on a Tommy gun and has the same values. As a talent, it is a decent choice, I feel, for some people that already are going for those kind of accuracy and stability talents, especially on controller. They can be kind of useful sometimes, as a lot of people do like the burnout or even the glory days on controllers, and I may understand why. Personally, this will not feature for me on any build. I am perfectly fine firing a FAMAS without any real bonuses. Although, of course, usually we're firing it on a striker build, which already has 15 weapon handling, and that's kind of the thing. You really need that little bit of the start. A little bit of weapon handling kind of helps. And of course, as well, having played now on a character that doesn't have all of the watch points, it was very obvious that, yeah, missing the stability, missing this accuracy kind of hurts. But we get those once we get to 1K. And that might make this a good weapon for maybe more starter players. But yeah, it comes at the cost of a damage talent or a utility talent in the way of preservation or fast stance. But one thing I feel a lot of people are getting a little bit wrong is that they will talk about steady-handed being a better version of it. That isn't really the case, although here I'm using it on a high-end red that doesn't have any weapon handling to begin with. If we start shooting, we get more and more accurate, which is kind of the same way that Stabilize works. We'll get halfway. We need to get up to full way. I'm going to reload here just so it happens not in the reload exactly. But yeah, there's this moment where we're perfectly accurate, and then it just starts to jump once again. And that moment is very annoying. From experience, having tried to make the steady-handed work for many other weapon types, that moment where it falls away is very annoying, especially if you're going for long-range shots. And that is the only benefit that Stabilize then has over steady-handed, is that while you're firing, you're getting more and more accurate, and it never falls away. So you don't have that moment of awkwardness where it falls away. But this is mostly only really an issue if you're like really shooting at the longer ranges and are going at you know, those kinds of ranges and going for headshots and stuff. And yeah, the G36 already was not a good candidate for this. I've tried Stabilize on a few other weapons. It feels kind of great on, for instance, a CTAR that is already a laser, which you make even more of a laser. It helps a little bit of FAMAS to be more controllable. But I end up just not wanting it because I could have fast stance, I could have preservation, I could have strains, I could have optimist, I could have any of the other choices that exist in that slot. Hell, I could even have measured. Actually, no, I'd pick stabilize over measured. But yeah, just to kind of show that, because I feel a lot of people do deride it for that. I feel this for ARs and SMGs actually feels a lot better than the steady-handed does for ARs, especially, and SMGs. The thing with it is that usually you would run it on LMGs, and that's kind of, I feel, why a lot of people don't notice this, because, of course, the LMGs have inverse accuracy, kind of, where they get more accurate as you're firing them. And usually the point where steady-handed falls away, you're already pretty accurate at that point. So you don't get that jarring feeling that it kind of suddenly jumps up. With this, with ARs and stuff, it is a lot more noticeable. So this does have a place, I feel. Although its place, of course, is kind of next to some of the more utility talents that we already don't really often pick. Like you would already not really use something like Glory Days or Burnout when you get more advanced and try to squeeze more damage out of a build. So yeah, let's move it on to the conclusion, and I'll give my final thoughts. And to conclude this video, I think this is a pretty good season, as of course here I haven't discussed any of the content really. I feel the man-hunts are still good. They're putting some time in. They have decent enough starting cutscenes, and getting Cindy back was fun, even though she, of course, instantly admits that she's the recruiter. So yeah, the plot twist is kind of failed because yeah, at the end of the season, of course, she will just put on the costume of the recruiter and become it. But yeah, content-wise, and of course as well, Incursion has found a lot of play, and people are enjoying it. From the people, as I'm not one that has ran it a lot, I'll get into it likely a little bit deeper in the season, as that is usually how I get into seasons. I'll usually leave the content a little bit to simmer and then jump into it once it is a little bit more understood. But yeah, gear-wise, where my forte kind of is, I feel, yeah, the Ouroboros is very much the new meta. It has come in and has surpassed anything that has been before it. Together, of course, as it pairs together already with the current meta really well, which is Strikers. For me, this will displace a lot of weapons on a lot of builds. Once I have all four of them for all four characters, it will find a lot of places. And I'm not completely happy with that. I would much rather have build diversity. I would much rather have the ability to choose, for instance, between, weapons of similar strength. As Ouroboros is, yeah, it is too good. It is one that does deserve at least some attention, although I think they will not change it. Honestly, I think the way they have put it into the game, and also it coinciding as well with the release of Incursions, it would incur a lot of backlash if they were to alter it at this point. So I don't think they will. So it will stay as is. Hopefully, as they were talking about some balance passes, a lot of other stuff maybe gets pulled up to it, so that it's on par with it. Maybe that would be the way I would do it. Now that you've basically messed up, that's how I would fix it, is bringing other things on par with it, and then coinciding that, because at this point heroic has become a cakewalk. Legendary isn't too too hard anymore once you know it. I would maybe pair that as well with maybe, if I were to interject something into there, would be to maybe add in a new difficulty, heroic plus mythic, something like that. Just one difficulty above heroic, and with increased rewards as well for it, of course, and yeah, try to salvage it that way, because I feel, yeah, the balance has been thoroughly put in the hands of the players, with Strikers and Ouroboros linking in really well together. The other things that have gone in with it is pretty decent. I don't mind the Iron Lung. I don't think the collector is really great. The brand set was pretty bad. It's a bad idea. I don't feel there's any cohesion there. I don't really know what they were going for. The backpack named one is okay-ish, mostly because they actually seem to have listened to some of the community. As yeah, there was a push to flip from BTS to have it, instead of be 7 stacks of 5, to have it be 5 stacks of 7. and they seem to have listened to that, which I'm very happy about. As yeah, that has made it closer to viable than it used to be. And yeah, the new talent on weapons is likely some people will use it, some people will swear by it. It will not feature for me. And yeah, let's end it here, and I will follow this up in a few days with a Heartbreaker Tech Tank Showcase. We'll also still revisit my new account and how it's going with that, as yeah, we have moved on from being a baby, as that account is reaching close to SHD 400, which has gone quite fast. Although I've been putting quite a bit of playtime into it, so yeah, we'll be revisiting that one as well with the Rambling Talk. And as well, the second part, of course, of the damage calculation video is coming hopefully pretty soon, as the guide is ready. I just need to get it done. But yeah, those are all upcoming things. And for now, the only thing left for me to say is have a good night.